Right? In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I kind of went back and forth about what to study. I want to do something foundational than the beginning of the Bible, Genesis, the creation of the world. Of course, this is now a classic, Creation, Genesis, and Early Man by Father Seraphim Rose. And I try. How many of us have the book? Who owns the book? John has the book. Yeah, I encourage everyone to order the book from St. Herman's. It's a wonderful. It's a tremendous resource, and they're on their third edition now, first edition. I have a personal connection with this book somehow, and that's way back when George was a wee fellow, and we were in Denver, and we were having our evening adult classes. I think they were on Thursday nights at the Browns, so Denver, and we had this book had not been published, but Father Alexei Young had given me a photocopy of Father Seraphim's handwritten notes that form the core of what we're going to be reading. These chapters on the first 11. And so way back before this book existed in Denver, we were doing a preview basically of the book because we had Father Seraphim's notes, and in all of our moves, I've lost them. I don't have his handwritten notes, and that's a shame because it'd be a great thing to have, a wonderful thing to beautifully printed and filled out a book that adds to there are many materials in the book that add to what Father Seraphim wrote. His work is the core of the book, but there's a lot of information here added since his time. Very important stuff. So what we're going to be doing, the book has, including the apparatus at the back, the book is almost 1,200 is 1,200 pages. We're not going to be doing 1,200 pages. Okay? Where I'm going to start, I don't know, those of you who have the book, we're going to start with Father Seraphim's foreword. Why study the book of Genesis? Why study the book of Genesis? And we're going to go through his examination of the patristic commentary through the flood, through chapter 11 of Genesis, and well, actually through the Tower of Babel. So that's going to go to page, I have it marked, that's going to go to page, in the third edition, page 368 to 368, about 260 pages. Okay, so we're going to take our time. Obviously, this isn't going to happen overnight. And we're just going to read through the book at a leisurely pace and talk about it, which is what I've always done. It's just been always my way that I taught. Hello, Yuri. Dobry wieczór. So we're just going to read through it. And as you have questions, I'm going to make observations. Because that's what we're here for here. It's really book club. Really, this is really book for Father Stephen leading the book club. That's really what it is. We're reading the book, and whoever doesn't have the book yet, I encourage you to order from St. Herman Press. St. Herman Press is very efficient. They'll usually get it out very quickly, $5. So another nice thing about St. Herman Press is that they're affordable and they're efficient. And of course, we're not happy with them about the way they've falsified some of Father Seraphim's book. Admit that they still are providing very important, extremely important literature for us. Okay. By the way, those of you who've been following the Seraphim Rose falsification controversy, I don't know what you mean. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. So Father Seraphim Rose in his books in Orthodox Word magazine was very clear about being against ecumenism and being very clear that he favored the Greco calendarists, and that he was not that he and Father Herman and Plotina were not in communion with the people that the Church abroad did not serve with. And now, since St. Herman has joined World Orthodoxy, they're falsifying these passages, or they're leaving them out, or they're rewriting them without seeing a document. They're out to get you, right? That they're not being honest. And recently, someone told me that I think it was Michael Gallagher. You told me that some far left so-called Orthodox Greek New Calendarists at Fordham University, conservative World Orthodox, calling them on the carpet for doing this, saying, "Listen, let's be honest. Seraphim Rose was a schismatic. He was a fanatic, anti-World Orthodox, anti-New Calendar, anti-progress, a reactionary dynasty of us, and he's not. And the good thing is that they're honest, right? They're being honest, and so it's good to see that somebody's, even from the left, someone now is taking them on and attacking it for this. But I don't want to dwell on it. Let's get into this book.
May I interject?
Yes.
George Allen here, just quickly interjecting, point of order. If anyone wants to, if you click the React button at the bottom of Zoom, there's a raise hand feature. I don't know how Zoom savvy everyone is, but if you click the React, call on you and you can unmute and jump in with your question.
And if you're not Zoom savvy, just jump in, or just raise your hand. Okay, those of you, I can't see all of you. I can see only Tikon and John Britt. And that's all right.
Yeah,
it's whoever wants to. So there, I remember, I want to start with saying that I'm not going into reading this book using Socratic method to say, we don't know what the answer is. Let's read this book and find out what the fathers thought about creation. I'd like to make full disclosure. Visiting this Roman Catholic educator years ago, his name is Dr. James Patrick. He founded a classical college in Fort Worth called St. Thomas More College, Thomas More College. You should be generous. You should be open up right away and tell everyone what you think. You shouldn't trick them into thinking what you think. And I'm not good at Socratic method anyway. So we're not going to go through and say, now, what do we think is going on here? We know what's going on here, which is that the modern Darwinist narrative is a bunch of lies and garbage, and you can't reconcile Darwinism with Christianity. And Father Seraphim Rose saw this clearly in going through the commentary of the fathers on this. And in general, the picture today is that Copernican astronomy is falling apart. So the whole scientific worldview that's been created since the Renaissance is disintegrating, and more and more people just don't believe in it anymore. And this work by Father Seraphim is in the Orthodox. Good evening, Callaways, and not only in the context of Orthodox traditionalism, so to speak, and the recovery of Orthodox tradition, but in a civilization-wide shift now, where the entire era where the so-called scientific consensus of the entire modern period has been called into question. And Seraphim Rose is kind of, in the Orthodox world, Seraphim Rose is kind of a pioneer in dealing with this. And now Seraphim Rose, this book's strictly about creation. In the book, he'll indicate that he believed in Copernican astronomy. He was not a geocentrist. He'll even give the example of the shift from Ptolemaic cosmology evidence and coming up with a different model, just as he says these Darwinists need to re-examine the evidence and realize that creation is the truth, right? And but you have to see in the context of his time, he proposed in 1982, and so from the late 50s, early 60s on, don't turn my phone off. Yes, whoever it is, I'm sure it doesn't really need to speak with me. And by the way, if you're ever trying to get me, don't call me over and over again. That makes me get stubborn, not want to answer the phone. So it's quite possible that we've been selected. Einstein, no less than Einstein, said that yes, we could have a geocentric cosmology. We just don't want one. And that's why he invented the voodoo mathematics of relativity, so they could center of the universe. Anyway, that's another subject. I don't want to get into, but I'm just giving that as an example of the way that Father Seraphim is part of a whole historical movement. He's at an earlier stage now. It's much farther along now. As much of the evidence in this book that's after Father Seraphim's part, there's a lot of other material in this book that shows how far the anti-evolution movement and procreation movement has come since Father Seraphim's time. But he is worthy of so much honor for being an Orthodox pioneer in leading the way back to the belief in the creation. And he just takes us very calmly and patiently takes us through just a commentary. Says, well, if you believe in the Holy Fathers, this is what the Holy Fathers taught about Genesis. Also, I want to say that in there are phrases or sound bites that lead people astray. I've heard them this very year. Within the past few months, I've heard them from people who should have known better. And one of them was, Genesis is not a history book. PhD in theology, who's an calendarist. Genesis is not a history book. Well, I had this old professor in college named Dr. Francis Jackman. He talked weasel words. He used weasel words. Well, that's a weasel expression. History is not so on the one hand, you say, yes, Genesis is not in the sense of a modern academic history. Of course it's not. Whoever said it was, right? But it's an ambivalent statement, right? So it could lead you to believe the things that are in Genesis didn't really happen. And this is all an allegory, or it's all just dimly remembered memories, tribal memories that were woven into a legendary mythological framework. You see, but none of the Holy Fathers believe that. Okay, so a so-called theologian will only say things like that because he already feels inferior to all the atheist scientists, right? He's already trying to appease. He's a little chihuahua running after the big dogs, right? Trying to appease the big guys by saying, well, we don't have to believe it's really history. We can just say it's an allegory or it has mystical. So he can't get around is that none of the fathers believe that. None of them believe that. All of those things really happened, and they happened as recorded, you see. So in that sense, yes, Genesis is a history book. The other thing I heard recently, the Holy Fathers are authoritative on dogma and morals, but not on history and science. Okay. Again, weasel words. It's ambivalent. It's ambivalent. How many amoeba can fit into a drop of pond water, right? In that sense, they're not, go to the fathers to learn natural science. Or, You don't go to the fathers to learn exactly how many miles away the moon is from the earth, or things like that. But when the Holy Fathers do make a scientific statement and then say that this is divine, and guess what? There are lots of scientists today who are doing very serious peer-reviewed studies that uphold everything the fathers taught and everything that's in the Bible. And then these so-called Orthodox experts say, well, Father, don't go after those people. They're Catholics. They're Protestants. Oh, so I can't listen to Catholic and Protestant scientists, but you guys can listen to the atheist, Satan-worshiping scientists. These fundamentalists. Well, they may be Protestant fundamentalists, but they have PhDs in astronomy and geology and biology. What do you have? From a divinity degree from some seminary. But you just feel inferior to the atheists and the anti-Christians who are teaching in the Ivy League. And so you want to run after them using words to confuse the faithful. Okay. So I've been upfront. I've told exactly where I'm coming from. I think y'all know where I'm coming from on this. And we have to fight, and we're going to defend the honor of the Holy Fathers, and we're going to defend the truth of our faith. Moses, everything in Genesis was revealed to Moses in 40 days in mystic vision on Mount Sinai. Moses went up the mountain. He went to the state of theoria, where he didn't eat or drink for 40 days. He was in a state of ecstasy. And God revealed to him things that no one else could know. Only God would know. Only God and his angels were present when the creation occurred. And God revealed this to Moses on Mount Sinai. And what's curious is that the very same theologians, neo-patristic theologians, will talk about theoria, and they also can't believe that Moses really was told all this. This is a result of the evolution, a cultural process of cultural evolution, that people, all these tribesmen, passed down their primitive legends and myths, and at some later date, somebody edited it and put it all together. You see, and they're even contemporary now philologists. And I remember when I was years ago, there was a Time magazine reported an article where even with the computer technology available then 30 years ago, a philologist or a semanticist ran the 5 books of Moses through his computer program to identify the authorship, and that computer said the same per every word, about constantly proving the Bible is true and the fathers are right. Okay? And so there's no reason for any Orthodox Christian, any true believing Christian who believes in the scriptures, to feel inferior or to hide what we believe from the secular world. Okay. Forward. Why study the book of Genesis? In the 3rd edition, it's page 107. Forward. Why should we study such a book as Genesis? Why shouldn't we just be concerned to save our souls instead of thinking about these things, like what is the world going to be like at the end of the world, or what is like at the beginning? That's one argument here. Well, don't worry about those things. So we can't know those things. Those things are controversial. Leave that alone. Just what we need to do now to say our prayers and avoid sin and so forth. Who Carl Sagan is. We old people know who Carl Sagan was. He did this series called Cosmos back in the 70s, and it starts with, has anybody seen those Cosmos episodes? It starts with the great ocean waves breaking on the rocks, and you hear Carl, ever has been, and all that ever will be, it is our home. and so Carl Sagan, so Father Stephen, he's dating himself because he's writing the 70s. Isn't it safer just to occupy ourselves with saying our prayers and not think about these great subjects? Why think about these remote things when we have to think of our salvation? I've heard relation between how you behave and how you believe about man's origin. If you believe you're just a glorified monkey, why would you say your prayers? Right? Father George Calciu, there's a well-known Romanian priest. Father George Calciu, in his public addresses to the young people living under communism in Romania, said, which must be trained. And that's what actually the communists did. If you talk to anyone who went through communist training, the first thing they teach if the communists would take over a country or take over a village, they gather everyone together. They didn't talk about Marx. They didn't talk about economic theory. The first apes. So Father Seraphim goes on. That can be a very powerful thing. Science proves we're just animals. So let's go out and blow up a church. I mean, that is, and of course we see this in Dostoevsky, right? Dostoevsky's predicting us in his novels, especially this, if there, or Ivan Karamazov says, in Brothers Karamazov, if there's no God, all things are permitted, right? Secondly, he says, so first of all, our origins and our purpose tell us how we should live. Second, the book of Genesis is a part of the scriptures, and God gave us the scriptures for our salvation. He gave us the scriptures for our salvation. We're supposed to know the meaning of the scriptures through all the commentaries of the Holy Fathers. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What did the fathers? Remember, the fathers are not uniform. They don't have absolute unanimity, but they have a remarkable consensus. When you think of the number of the Holy Fathers over a long span of period of time, and from different cultures and different backgrounds and so forth, writing in different languages, and they all have this remarkable consensus. Those were actually sermons given in church, because the book of Genesis is read in church on the weekdays during Great Lent, right? The weekday, at least in our Byzantine Typicon, right? Monday through Friday, we read from Genesis. A great with their 6 weeks, 30 pericopes, 30 readings from Genesis. The great fathers who did this were St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil the Great, and St. Ambrose of Milan. Their sermons were taken down in shorthand by people who were in church listening to them so that others could read them. That's why all the patristic exegesis that we have are really from no presentations. Remember, the fathers, these fathers were great rhetoricians. They were trained to digest enormous amounts of material and then express it extemporaneously to an audience. They had been trained. All the people of their class were trained to do this in the political forum or on law courts. Okay, and then people would take down their notes. They'd often have an amanuensis, a secretary, who would write down. For example, Saint John Chrysostom had Saint Prochorus, for example, and they were written down. Thus, the church. This is what they did, right? This is how they spent their time. We have somewhat lost this idea nowadays. Why have we lost it? Okay. Therefore, the account of Genesis or the Apocalypse. Remember, Father Seraphim Rose translated the Lycoviarches, come through in the Apocalypse, forgetting that. Okay. Genesis or Apocalypse have become very mysterious somehow. We're so scared of these subjects, but the fathers talked about them. They weren't afraid to talk about them. Funny, and this is the big point. And he says, this is the big point. What we are going to be doing in eternal life. Eternal life. Okay. It's become a cliche now, but it's true. Orthodoxy is otherworldly. We're focused on our real life, which is the life to come. It is to prepare us for something eternal, not of this world. John 18:36. If we think only about this world, our rise to purpose of life, when we talk about the beginning of things or the end of things, we find out what our whole life is about. What is life about? That's why we're here. Okay. So we start chapter 1, how to read Genesis, approach. In a sense, none of us knows how to approach this book. Those in facts about the beginnings of the universe and man, that we inevitably come to this book with preconceived notions. Some wanted to agree with their particular scientific theories. Others look for it to disagree with their theories. Both of these look to it as having something scientific to say, but others look to it on sheer as okay. So you have anti-Christians who say, look, the science in this book is bad, it's wrong, so don't believe this book. Then you have Christians who believe in the book, in what it said has to say about actual things that really happened. They say, who are just saying, oh yes, we accept Genesis, but it's all a beautiful allegory, it's just beautiful poetry, it's about spiritual realities that we really can't say or correspond to anything in the physical world. It's just something there that you have the same extremes in people dealing with the book of Revelation. There's the school that says they're the silly preachers and the sectarians. Everything in the Apocalypse is some specific event, and purely allegorical. It's nothing to do with the end of the world. And of course, it does have to do with the end of the world. But that's apocalyptic literature. But Genesis is not apocalyptic literature. Genesis is narrative. It's narrative history. Okay. Some Protestant fundamentalists find possible difficulties, quite apart from a literal or non-literal interpretation of various passages. The very nature of reality, which is described in the first chapters of Genesis, the very creation of all things, makes it quite impossible for everything to be understood literally. We don't even have words, for example, to describe how something can come out of nothing, because we can't even imagine how that could be, right? So as much as we should admire the efforts of the creationist scientists to show how science does not disagree with Genesis, some of them slip into the fallacy of thinking that they can go back into the 6 days of creation and make precise scientific first 6 days of creation. The very reality of them is that they're a miracle. They're miraculous. So the processes operating in the 6 days are ended with the 6th day or the 7th day. They were over. Then the processes of nature prior to the flood went into effect, and then after the flood again, and what we're living with today are the natural processes that were set in motion by the flood. Okay. So I admire these scientists, but the smarter they have to be cautious and realize that some of their findings really are tentative. How does God speak, for example? How does he make a noise which resounds in the atmosphere that doesn't exist? Okay, so there is you can try to be literal to the nth degree in areas where it doesn't make sense. But for the most part, if any modern person reads this book, he'll say, well, Father Seraphim Rose is a fundamentalist, that these things really happened. Okay. Then there's the opposite extreme. So he would like to interpret the book, at least the earlier chapters, which give the most difficulty, as being an allegory, a poetic way of describing something that's really much closer to our experience. See? It's all an allegory. You don't have to believe it really happened like this. Okay. Roman Catholic thinkers in recent years have come up with some ingenious ways of explaining away paradise and the fall of man. But in reading these interpretations, one has the impression they have so little respect, commentary on some recent scientific theories. And I'm sure some of you have heard of Teilhard de Chardin, the so-called Roman Catholic. He was a Jesuit. Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit in the 20th century who was actually a radical materialist. And there's a whole so-called theology in which of evolving to become the cosmic Christ. Exactly. I mean, it's stupid. It sounds like if you're a hippie smoking dope and listening to Jefferson Airplane, it sounds great. Okay, but actually, it's what is that? He called, and there's the omega point, and but then some Orthodox, so-called Orthodox professors who wanted to be cool, jumped in the bandwagon. John Meindorf said that it's absurd. Okay, it's absurd, but this is the kind of thing. So we're dealing with a lot of confusion here in the 20th century with so-called Orthodox professors jumping on the bandwagon like Teilhard de Chardin. St. John of Damascus, the 8th century father, whose views generally sum up Patristic. St. John of Damascus, in the exact exposition of the Orthodox faith, states specifically that the allegorical interpretation of paradise is part of an early heresy and does not belong to the church. St. John of Damascus says that interpreting paradise allegorically, beings of paradise, but in addition to accepting the historical narrative. And St. John of Damascus says, if you don't accept the historical narrative, you're a heretic. So that should for an Orthodox believer, that should kind of set him on notice, right? One encounters often today a common way out between these two views under the title, God helped create evolution. So this is the whole thing, theistic evolution, right? God-guided evolution. She says, the biblical story of creation has a religious purpose. It contains but does not teach errors. Whatever that means, errors. Believe me, I'm a product of the Catholic schools of this era. And if you were in that class, you'd be going, yeah, sister, yeah. It's deep. It's deep, man. It's deep. It's stupid. The evolutionary theory of creation, in contrast, has a scientific purpose. The search for truth is the province of astronomers, geologists, biologists, and the like. The two purposes, read her whole quote. This is I'm sure some hippie nun in pantsuits back in 75 or something, the kind of women who ended up teaching me in high school. The biblical story of creation has a religious purpose. It has a religious purpose. It contains but does not teach errors, whatever that means. The evolutionary theory of creation, the search for truth, is the province of astronomers, geologists, biologists, and the like. These two purposes are distinct and both offer truth to the human mind and heart. It's two truths. She states that Genesis comes from oral traditions, which are limited by the scientific views of their time. Okay. By the way, speaking of seminary, and what they were teaching at St. Vladimir's Seminary, at least when I was in my time, I don't know what they're teaching now, probably, I don't know. It was the four source theory of the Pentateuch. Okay, the Pentateuch means the 5 books of Moses. In my time, was that Moses did not write the 5 books of Moses. There are 4 different authors: the Yahwist, the Elohist, the priestly, and the Deuteronomic. And you can identify the Yahwist contributions because he uses the name Yahweh, or the Tetragrammaton for the name of God. Identify the Elohist passages, like he uses the word Elohim, concerned with the rituals, the temple rituals. And the Deuteronomic author just wrote Deuteronomy, which is a totally separate thing. Okay. And that some editor, around the time of King David, some editor put it all together. That's the origin of the 5 books of Moses. Okay. This was common coin for decades in the seminaries, including I know at least St. Vladimir's Seminary, really messed up OCA priests. Well, one of the many reasons. And and this is but of course, as I said earlier, some scientists put authorship, and the computer program said the same man wrote the whole thing. And of course, we already knew that, right? Moses received this revelation on Mount Sinai. Okay? So according to this view, according to the view of this Roman Catholic pseudo-nun, according to this view, Genesis belongs in one category, and scientific truth or reality is another category. So they're different realities, truth, whether literal or allegorical. It just makes you feel good. Right? Therefore, one doesn't really need to think about the question. You read Genesis for spiritual uplift, for poetry, and the scientists will tell you that what you need. The scientists will tell you what you need to know about the facts of the world and where man comes from. And Father Seraphim goes on. In one form or another, this is a very common view today, especially in his time. Back in the 60s. It actually amounts to is a failure to look at the question at all. It does not take Genesis seriously. Our very purpose in studying Genesis is to take it seriously, to see what it says, what it actually says. None of these approaches we have mentioned can do this. We must look elsewhere for the key to understand Genesis. Above, by a certain degree of self-awareness, what kind of prejudices or predispositions might we have in approaching the text? We have already mentioned that some of us today may be too anxious to have the meaning of Genesis agree or disagree with some particular theory. Let us say that he's writing in the 1970s. We, with our 20th century mentality, tend to do this. In reaction to the extreme literalness of our scientific outlook, a literalness required by the very nature of science, when we turn to non-scientific texts, literal or universal meanings, this is natural. We want to save these texts from appearing ridiculous in the eyes of scientifically trained men. But we must realize that with this predisposition, we often lead to conclusions which are not really thought over very seriously. So what he's saying is that we have this preconceived notion that only the hard sciences give truth. Then you approach any other kind of text, you assume it doesn't have truth. Okay. To take an obvious example, when we hear the 6 days of creation, most of us automatically adjust the gradual growth and development of creatures. This is one of the big stumbling blocks, right? People say, well, the world is a billion zillion years old, and so the 6 days can't possibly be just days. There must be some indefinitely long period of time, millions, billions of years. All these geological strata, all those fossils. There as a footnote. The identification of the 6 days of creation with vast ages, now known as the day-age theory, is a modern concept, first promoted in 19th century Scotland. Some Christians of our times have attempted to find this idea in the writings of the early fathers, but a careful examination of the patristic writings they cite revealed that the fathers taught no such doctrine. Yeah, we'll see that when we read the patristic commentary. Although insisting that these days are positively 24 hours long and no longer, we can become indignant. How can people be so dense and anti-scientific? Okay, so just because a guy in Texas with a pickup truck and a rebel flag and a gun says it's true doesn't mean it's false. In this course, I don't intend to tell you how long those days were, right? I don't intend to tell you how long they were. Indefinitely long periods, at least back in the 70s. Maybe we don't, right? Because we've been orthodoxized. We've been Seraphim Roseized, right? That this is now a classic for us, right? When he was writing this, he was a pioneer, right? Okay. We think our almost subconscious way of solved the problem they present is not really a thought out answer to the problem. It's a predisposition, it's a prejudice we've picked up out of the intellectual air in which we live. When we look at these days more closely, however, we will see that the whole question is not so simple. Our natural predisposition in this, as in many other cases, we'll look at the specific question later, the question about the length of the days. For now, I would urge us to be not so certain of our custom ways of looking at Genesis, to open ourselves to the wisdom of the God-bearing men of the past. Now he's coming to this point. The wisdom of the God-bearing men of the past who had devoted so much intellectual effort to understanding. These holy fathers are our key to understanding Genesis. See, that's the punchline. The holy fathers are our key to understanding Genesis. The fathers who are wise in God, Part two of this chapter, the holy fathers are key to understanding the understanding of Genesis, meaning of God's revelation. They are a link between the ancient texts, which contain God's revelation, and today's reality. Without such a link, it is every man for himself. The result is a myriad of interpretations and sects. Okay, so in Orthodox, the fathers. There are many patristic commentaries on Genesis. Right? The text was considered important by the fathers of the church. Let's now look which fathers talked about this text and what books they wrote. In this course, I'll take us in were lecture notes for their New Valam Academy in Platina back in the 70s and early 80s. In this course, I will make use primarily for 4 commentaries of the early fathers, the 4 big commentaries. St. John Chrysostom, of course, right, wrote a larger and smaller commentary on the whole book of Genesis. The larger, called Homilies on Genesis, was actually read in church. This book contains 67 homilies and is 700 pages long. Another year, St. John delivered 8 other homilies comprising several hundred more pages. And the footnote says his 8 homilies were delivered during Great Lent in 386. The 67 homilies were delivered in 388 or 389. Thus, in St. John Chrysostom, we have 1,000 pages or more of interpretation of Genesis. Again, from about the same time as St. John Chrysostom, also as a commentary on the whole book. In his work called simply Interpretation of the Books of the Bible, several hundred pages are devoted to Genesis. St. Ephraim is valued as an Old Testament interpreter because he knew the sciences. Okay, remember, St. Ephraim's language was Syriac. Syriac is the spoken vernacular Hebrew of our Lord's time. So what the Jew in the street was speaking in our Lord's time was, you can call it Aramaic or call it Syriac. It's basically the same language. So this is what the language St. Ephraim spoke, and he knew Hebrew very well. Creation called the Hexameron. Hexameron, of course, just means 6 days. Exe in Greek and Emeta, 6 days. There are other hexamera, in the literature of the early church, some going back to the 2nd century. St. Basil's, one might say, is the most authoritative. Here's a footnote. St. Basil's hexameron was held in high esteem in the ancient church. I read it in my hand and read it aloud. I wish I'm with my Creator. I understand the reasons for creation. I admire my Creator more than I formerly did when I used sight alone as my teacher. St. Basil's brother, St. Gregory of Nyssa, called the work a divinely inspired study by our Father Bear to what Moses taught. Not being inferior to what Moses taught. Isn't that wonderful? Okay. But St. Basil's commentary doesn't cover the whole of Genesis, but the first chapter, the creation, the 6 days. But another book by him we will quote is called On the Origin of Man, a continuation of the Hexameron. The West, St. Ambrose of Milan. You're St. Ambrose. St. Ambrose of Milan read St. Basil's homilies and wrote homilies on the 6 days himself. The note says his homilies were probably delivered in the year 387. His Hexameron is quite a bit longer, about 300 pages. St. Ambrose also wrote a whole book on paradise, continuation of the Hexameron, as well as a book on Cain and Abel. In addition to this, or into the whole of the 6 days, for example, the brother of St. Basil, St. Gregory of Nyssa, has a book on the making of man, shows in detail about the end of the first chapter, just on the creation of man, and the beginning of the 2nd chapter of Genesis. The end of the first chapter, beginning of the 2nd chapter about the creation of man. I've also made use of the outlines of Orthodox dogma, the book of Saints about the 6 days, the creation of man, the fall, paradise, and so forth. Okay, how many have read St. John Damascus? Who's read on the exact exposition of the Orthodox faith? You've got to. It's a must. You have to read St. John Damascus. It is St. John's masterful summation. So St. John's writing in the 8th century, right? He's the father whose work of the icons provided much of the theological, but he's a summarizer of the whole patristic tradition of the first 8 centuries, right? So his on the Orthodox faith, de fide orthodoxa in Latin, peritis pistios orthodoxias, you might say that it takes the writings of the fathers, summarizes their consensus about what the Bible means, essentially, on all the basic topics, all the must-know topics. So it's a must-read. Everyone should read on the Orthodox faith. The Great Catechism of St. Gregory of Nyssa and the George Allen, you can listen to them online. Also, a few details on these questions. Okay. One specific question of the patristic worldview, I've used the treatises. On one specific question of the patristic worldview, I've used the treatises on the resurrection by Saints Athanasius the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Ambrose of Milan. The Fall in the Early World, which we have in English in the book, The Sin of Adam and Our Redemption. So now it's published by St. Herman under the title The First Created Man, by St. Simeon the Theologian. Then there are various writings of St. Gregory the Theologian about the creation of man, man's nature, his soul. St. Macarius the Great, Abba Dorotheus, St. Isaac the Syrian. Otherwise, they have to. If you have a foundation for the science of ascetical life, you have to know what we were, what we fell from, what we fell to, and how we recover our original state. Right? Since the basic aim of the ascetic life is to return to the state of Adam before the fall, they write about what the fall means, what paradise was, what it is we're trying to get back to. Okay? And they all took it quite literally. Remember, these are all men of exalted spiritual life, understanding of the nature of things. Okay, so we're getting back to Orthodox ascetical theology, as the person's liberated, freed from his passions, and instructed in spiritual knowledge and wisdom from God. He arrives at an understanding of the logos about every created thing. Okay? He arrives at a higher understanding than mere empirical science. Okay? It takes in a vision of the whole cosmos. Okay? These people have very high knowledge, imparted directly by God. City of God. There's a long footnote here about St. Augustine, which I don't want to do. That's all episode. We could do semesters on St. Augustine, but I don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We'd be doing a lot of work for a little benefit. But you could read the footnote. If you have the book, you can read the footnote. Writes on various aspects, and his apologetic works, and Gregory of Sinai writes on paradise as well. In parentheses, there are also some later commentaries which I have not seen. Unfortunately, one is by St. John Kronstadt on the Hexameron, another by Metropolitan Philip of Moscow on Genesis. Okay, what time do we have?
8:50.
Okay, we have about 10 more minutes. Answers the questions we may have about Genesis. We read them rather to get our attitude toward Genesis. Then it gives us all the answers we might have questions for, but they teach us how to think about it. Sometimes fathers will for the questions we have today. Therefore, we must have some basic principles which govern our understanding both of Genesis and the Holy Fathers. So the next section is basic principles of our approach. So we're going to, it's almost 9 o'clock, and I think it's worthwhile. We could have jumped right into the commentary, but I thought it was worthwhile to read this essay of Father about how to read Genesis, right? Because he's explaining his method before we go into the actual. But do we have questions? Comment. Somebody jump in. Somebody say something wise, or ask a question to make me say something wise. Any observations?
It's
I'm going to point out. Hello, Evan.
Oh, is Evan going? Go ahead.
Oh, Michael Hawk, were you saying something?
Oh, I thought somebody else was
Turn
talking.
on your mic.
He's
can you hear me
unmuted,
now?
but we're still not getting
Oh, we're
any.
not getting his audio.
Michael, I'm sorry, we're not
Michael, I'm
getting your
sorry, we're
audio.
not getting your audio. Oh well. All right. Ambrose, do you have a question? No.
I'll ask a question.
All right.
Is there among the fathers many questions when it comes to the commentary of the fathers on matters of scripture or the faith?
Right.
Opinion on some matters.
Yeah, on some matters.
On some matters. So, to begin with, is there any well-known example or any notable example of a distinguished father or well-known figure who has a minority opinion used or appeal to?
The only quote, can anybody guess what the only quote they ever use is? The only quote they ever used was St. Augustine.
Mm-hmm.
It was ironic because a lot of them hate St. Augustine. They use St. Augustine in a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
At least you can interpret what St. Augustine says, because St. Augustine's going to the Psalm 90, Psalm 89 that we say every day at the first hour. For a nice sight, for nine eyes 1,000 years versus a day, and a day is 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they use that. St. Augustine says that, and then in other places, Father some points doesn't really mean that to be interpreted that way. There's another train of thought they use. The other train of thought they use is that the fathers will say, look how wise God was that he did this in stages, right? He didn't do it all at once. He did it, let there be light, and separating light from darkness, separating the earth from the waters, the creation of the bodies, the creation of the sea and the animals and the flying things, and the creation of the earthbound animals, the terrestrial animals and man. See, and well, look, the fathers are agreeing that it was evolution, right? It happened gradually. But they weren't saying they weren't gradually over millions of years. They were just saying that look how wise God was. He did it in these stages, over 6 days. That's all. So they'll twist things. From the Hawk family. This topic is more and more relevant. Oh, it disappeared.
You don't see it? I still see it under my messages.
Read it. Materialism is in decline. Aha! But with the UFO, psychedelic, AI, God religion of the future, a patristic understanding will be more and more key. Very good. Good point. So this is a very important point, actually. So Father Seraphim, of course, he was dealing with just gross realism of Richard Dawkins or something like that. But then also, he was also dealing, but in Orthodoxy and religion of the future, he was dealing with the rise of pseudo religion, and including UFOs. Right? And he wasn't. I don't know if he could look forward to the AI thing, but now we're shifting now. The whole paradigm is shifting from the modern scientific synthesis to a postmodern questioning of that it's from neo-pagans, it's from the tree-hugging environmentalists, it's all over the place. Okay, people are questioning, and that's why the scientific oligarchical establishment's losing their grip, which is why they're so eager to herd us into the New World Order, because they're losing their grip. The conception of space, they're questioning science, the scientific establishment, not science as a noble effort of man to interpret God's creation. That's always been a noble. God wants to use scientific establishment. And so what's happening, but the problem is that if they don't have Christ, they don't have the church. They turn to AI as the new oracle. The prophet AI will tell us all things. And so this is your insight is very important. Yes, we're dealing more and more now with simple metaphysical materialism, which is a very indefensible imagination can believe in, or maybe a lot of imagination. Yeah, a lot of imagination believe in it. But we're dealing now with an explosion of false religion, and so it's more and more we have to cling to the Holy Scriptures, cling to the Fathers, cling to the teaching of the Church, and also be in our own process, our own inner process of purification. Discernment is the thing. Discernment with a capital D. Discernment with all caps should be our theme song at all times. What do we see with the whole COVID phenomenon? We even saw Orthodox bishops who were flawless about their ecclesiology just fall totally for the COVIDian narrative. What did they lack? They lacked discernment. Christ. Okay. So we've got to be very attentive. We've got to be very on our toes and be praying and immersing ourselves. The beautiful thing, why do people? There are many reasons people love Seraphim Rose, and but one is that he revealed to people who are spiritually starving that there's a whole beautiful world of truth. It's an endless treasury of the constant revelation. Just saying that saying he had only most people this 3 times during the day, and the creed by itself is just revelation. It's mind from falsehood. The words themselves, there's the power in the words to cleanse the intellect. See, and we need to be doing this all the time. That's why we don't skip your prayers. Go to church. All those boring things the boring priests sing all the time. Right? We have to. We're fighting for our spiritual survival. We're fighting over our future destiny. And Trinity movements or Trinity interpretations of what's going on. Cling to the church. Stay close to the church. Rokor. Okay, were there fathers in Rokor who were the same spirit? I would say that he points out how there's a footnote here about Andreev. I would say that Andreev, Ivan Mikhailovich Andreev, who wrote the beginning of the Catacombs, the older 20th century generation were trying to wrap their heads around the contemporary science and the traditional understanding. And they were giving it a little bit to the idea it could have been a long time, but not that God guided evolution, not theistic evolution. That God created man later, something like that. He did not believe that men came from apes. The parish priests, as far as I could tell, of course, I only entered the church abroad in '85, so that was sort of at the tail end. But as far as I could tell, all the old parish priests, no, for 1 minute, believed in evolution. For 1 second, those who were writing, very few people were writing about it that I remember. I don't think anybody was really writing about it. And what you see with the Orthodox are always behind everybody else, right? We're 30 days behind the calendar. We're often behind addressing issues, are at the cutting edge trying to deal with this stuff. And we only come around, we're Johnny come latelys and finding, oh, by the way, we got the answer. We've been off in the corner having an ethnic festival and fighting about where this bishop's diocese ends and that this bishop stole my parish and so forth and so on. Well, meanwhile, the Orthodox and so or the Orthodox are really coming along later. Who led the way of anti-evolution in the early 60s? The landmark book, The Genesis Flood by Henry Morris and somebody else, forget the other name. Just the remarkably brilliant books by Philip E. Johnson, who's a Presbyterian. And also the Catholics have this whole Maximilian Kolbe Center in Washington that's totally devoted to the creation, center of creation. And they're pointing out they're working on the Catholics to reject it from promoting evolution ever since the 60s or before. And of course, in the modern Orthodox, like the St. Vladimir's Seminary follows along behind what the Catholics are doing. It's like they have a little, they're the little guy pulling up his britches and running behind the big guys of the parade with the important people. Now Hockna, what was it? What was the reaction of Hockna? Of course, they weren't Hockna then; they were just Boston, and they were pro-evolution. They want to admit, I think they want to admit it now. Like the Cyprianites now want to admit they were Cyprianites. Well, the Bostonites want to admit they were pro-evolution, but they were promoting the writings of Alexander. The most of us know of Calomiris is the author of Against False Union, which is a great book. Against False Union was a landmark book to get people thinking about ecumenism. When Father Alexei Young told me when he became Orthodox, Father Seraphim Rose said, "You've got to read 2 books, Unseen Warfare and Against False Union." Right? Unseen Warfare about the interior life, Against False Union, and to his anti-ecumenism. But then they were so shocked when they found that the Calomiris not only believed in evolution, but was writing against against believing in the Father's belief or with orthodoxy, and the Bostonians, none of the Boston monks couldn't come out and say we believe in evolution, but they were always trying to undermine Father Seraphim Rose and Platina, and so they were kind of quietly promoting among their people. They promote Calomiros, and Calomiros was rabidly pro-evolution. He said, if you don't believe in evolution, you're just a Protestant fundamentalist Yahoo. You're just a hillbilly. You're an idiot if you don't believe in evolution. So unquestioning belief in the scientific establishment, that's a scientific consensus. The scientific consensus is a highly controlled consensus, right? It's whoever gets the money. We're having a clergy meeting, and one of the priests said, Metropolitan Moses gave a long, very content-rich presentation against the masks, against the vaccines, against the whole narrative. Tons of evidence. And one priest just got up in like a half an hour, and this priest got up and talked 5 minutes, said very dismissively, that's what, come on. The belief in the vaccine and this is the scientific consensus, just like this. And Father John Summers got on and said, well, the scientific consensus now is that boys aren't boys and girls aren't girls. He just got all huffy and and he sat down because this so-called consensus is just this orchestrated propaganda, right, by people want to control your minds. So Columeros believed in this, right? He believed in the scientific consensus that you can't, if you question evolution, you're a troglodyte. Only a third grade dropout who lives in a cave somewhere would question evolution. And he wrote, and Columeros wrote from that standpoint. And Boston was quietly promoting him, right? And no, Boston never came out and said, you must believe in evolution, but they quietly promoted Columeros. Yeah. But that wasn't Boston's only rodeo. They had a lot of marginal things that they were trying to push on people. Any other questions or observations? All right. Well, I think so. We've gotten to page in the third edition, at least. John, do you have an earlier edition?
Should be a third.
Do you have an earlier edition? Or is that a third edition? Is anybody working with the third edition or the third edition?
It's second, but the pages are still correlating with what you're.
Alrighty. So no other questions or observations or all right. Very good. Well, it's about 9 o'clock now. It's a little after 9. 9 after 9. So I think we'll call it quits for the day. Michael Hawk, you're looking questioning. You're looking like you're trying to think of a question or no? We can't hear you.
You're muted.
I don't know what. You're muted. No, that's all right. All right. Well, we'll meet again.
We're at the park. I'm watching the kids at the park.
Oh, at the park. All right. Very good. Well, it's good to see everybody. Good to see everybody, and we're happy to have the group here. So in between now and next questions, or if you're reading ahead in the text and you're anticipating some things we could discuss, then please write me during the week, and then I can incorporate your questions or your observations into we'll begin the class on to keep. If you don't have the money, I'll give you the money. Get the book. All right. Okay, let's say a prayer. Okay. It is truly me to bless you, the Theotokos, ever blessed, most immaculate Mother of our God. Rather than the cherubim and beyond cherubim, glorious and seraphim, the corruption gives birth to God the Word. The very Theotokos, we magnify. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Spirit, both now and ever, through the ages. Amen. Lord of mercy, Lord of mercy, Lord of mercy. God is with us, through grace and love for mankind, always now and through the ages. Amen.